She died just hours before she was set to make her big comeback. A warm bath, a gospel song, a silent room on the fourth floor of the Beverly Hilton, just hours away from a stage that once belonged to her. Whitney Houston was gone. To the world, it was a shocking end. To those closest to her, it was a storm long brewing. She had the greatest voice of her generation, but could anyone survive the weight of becoming a myth? The air in Suite 434 of the Beverly Hilton Hotel is thick with a strange, heavy silence. Outside, the world buzzes with anticipation, a frantic energy building for the annual pre-Grammy gala hosted by Clive Davis, the very man who had once sculpted a goddess from raw talent. But inside this room, time has stopped. The bathwater is still warm, a testament to a moment that was, just minutes ago, alive with intention. Scattered around are the remnants of a life lived in the fast lane, a quiet meal, a Bible left open, the ordinary artifacts of an extraordinary existence. This was supposed to be a night of comeback, a reaffirmation of a legend. Instead, a stillness hangs in the air, a terrifying calm before a storm that would send shockwaves across the globe. When her body is found, submerged in the silent water, a story ends. But an agonizing mystery begins. The world would hear the clinical facts: drowning, heart disease, the ghosts of substances past. But those facts could never capture the deafening silence in that room. It was the end of a voice that had defined a generation, a voice that felt like it belonged to the heavens, now extinguished in the quiet solitude of a hotel bathroom. What really happened in those final silent moments in room 434? And was it the tragic end of a downward spiral, or the final inevitable collapse of a woman crushed by the weight of her own celestial talent? The story of Whitney Houston begins not in a recording studio, but in the pews of the New Hope Baptist Church in Newark, New Jersey. It begins with the sound of gospel music shaking the rafters, a sound that was less a performance and more a raw, unfiltered conduit to the divine. This was her inheritance, her birthright. Born into a dynasty of soul, she was surrounded by legends. Her mother, Cissy Houston, was a celebrated gospel and soul singer who had backed everyone from Elvis to Aretha Franklin. Her cousin was Dionne Warwick, a star in her own right. Her honorary aunt, the Queen of Soul herself, Aretha Franklin. Music wasn't just in her blood. It was the very air she breathed, the language she learned before she could properly speak. From a young age, it was clear that Whitney was different. Her voice wasn't just powerful, it was pristine, an instrument of impossible clarity and emotional depth. While other children played, Whitney was being groomed. Cissy was a loving mother, but also a demanding teacher, instilling in her daughter a discipline that bordered on militant. She understood the gift her daughter possessed, but she also understood the predatory nature of the industry that awaited her. This wasn't just about singing, it was about survival. Whitney's childhood was a tapestry of church solos, backup vocal sessions for her mother, and the quiet, crushing weight of expectation. She was a vessel for a divine gift, and everyone around her seemed to know it before she did. This early anointing as the chosen one would become both her greatest asset and her most profound burden. She was destined for greatness, a princess being polished for a throne she hadn't yet seen. Could these early experiences of immense pressure and expectation have sown the seeds for her later struggles with identity? The journey from church choir prodigy to global superstar began in the dim, intimate light of a New York City nightclub. It was there that the legendary record executive Clive Davis first witnessed the phenomenon. He wasn't just impressed, he was mesmerized. He saw not just a singer, but a vessel for pop perfection. The young Whitney Houston, with her model-like beauty and that once-in-a-generation voice, was a canvas on which he could paint a masterpiece. But this anointing came with a meticulous, almost suffocating level of control. Davis invested millions, assembling the industry's best producers and songwriters to craft an image and a sound that was unimpeachably perfect. Her debut album was a masterclass in pop engineering designed to be palatable to the widest possible audience. This carefully curated image of an effervescent, untouchable pop princess was an instant success. The hits came like a tidal wave. Saving all my love for you. How will I know? Greatest love of all. She was a vision of elegance and grace, a stark contrast to the edgier, more provocative female artists of the era. She was America's sweetheart. However, this manufactured perfection came at a cost. In an era of burgeoning hip-hop and politically charged R&B, some corners of the black community viewed her music as sterile, as being scrubbed of its soul to appease a white audience. At the 1989 Soul Train Awards, she was famously booed, a moment that deeply wounded her. She was a girl from Newark, steeped in the gospel tradition, yet she stood on stage feeling like an outsider to her own people. The struggle was not to get a record deal, but to reconcile the pristine icon on the album cover with the complex woman she was inside. She was fighting a war on two fronts, the immense pressure to maintain her flawless public image and the private battle to hold on to a piece of her own identity. Was the global stardom she achieved truly worth sacrificing a part of her authentic self? By the late 1980s and early 1990s, Whitney Houston was not just a star, she was a celestial event. Her rendition of the Star-Spangled Banner at Super Bowl 25 in 1991 transcended sport and patriotism. It became a moment of national catharsis, a unifying cry during the Gulf War. Her voice, soaring and majestic, seemed capable of healing a divided nation. She was flawless, a symbol of American grace and power. Then came The Bodyguard. The film turned her into a global movie star, and its soundtrack became the best-selling of all time, largely on the strength of one song. I Will Always Love You. That single track was an earthquake, a cultural phenomenon that cemented her status as the voice. She was on top of the world, an untouchable queen reigning over a pop culture kingdom that worshipped her every note. The glamour was blinding. The couture gowns, the sold-out stadiums, the endless awards, the adoration of millions. But the light that shines brightest casts the darkest shadow. Behind the perfect smile and the magnificent voice was a profound and growing loneliness. The pedestal the world had placed her on was also a cage. She was surrounded by people, an entourage, assistants, security, yet she was deeply, achingly alone. The pressure to be Whitney Houston, the icon, was relentless and suffocating. Every public appearance was a performance. Every note she sang was scrutinized. Every aspect of her life was managed and packaged for public consumption. While the world saw a goddess, her friends and family saw a young woman struggling to breathe. The applause of 100,000 fans in a stadium was deafening, but the silence of a hotel room after the show was even louder. It was in that silence that the seeds of self-destruction found fertile ground. The woman who sang of the greatest love of all was beginning to struggle to find love for herself. Behind the sold-out stadiums and the blinding flashbulbs, was there an unbearable loneliness that the world's applause could never silence? The relentless cycle of touring, while a testament to her global demand, often felt more like an exile than a celebration. From city to city, continent to continent, the private planes, the opulent hotel suites, the roaring crowds, it was a gilded cage. After the last note faded and the thunderous applause died down, the vast emptiness of the backstage area would descend, a stark contrast to the electric energy that had just filled the arena. Costumes lay draped on racks, still shimmering with the phantom echoes of spotlights. Makeup artists packed away their palettes, stylists meticulously hung gowns, and bodyguards stood sentinel, their gazes impassive. What did they truly think of Whitney? To them, she was not just the voice, but the demanding, often fragile woman they saw after every show. Some whispered of her generosity, her quick laughter, the glimpses of the nippy from Newark. Others noted the increasing reliance on a retinue, the subtle shifts in her demeanor, the growing chasm between the public persona and the private reality. One particular night in Germany, the exhaustion and loneliness became too much to bear. The arena had just erupted for "I Will Always Love You," a performance that had left the audience weeping. Yet in her dressing room, the tears were her own. The opulent space felt cold, impersonal. She stared at her reflection, the stage makeup still clinging to her skin like a mask, and saw not the global icon, but a young woman desperately missing the familiar comfort of home. The simple warmth of her family, the grounding presence that fame had slowly eroded. She sank onto a plush velvet couch, the silence pressing in around her, and simply wept. This was the unseen cost of superstardom, the profound isolation, the constant performance, the inability to truly be herself. The endless tour, meant to showcase her artistry, had instead become a crucible, stripping away layers of her soul, leaving her exposed and vulnerable. The pressure to be perfect, to be America's sweetheart, was an invisible weight she carried from the moment she signed her first major record deal. Every note had to be flawless, every appearance impeccable. Contracts stipulated strict image clauses. Her schedule was a grueling regimen of vocal training, recording sessions, endless interviews, and high-profile performances, from sold-out arenas to intimate concerts for presidents. She was presented as an ethereal, almost angelic figure, a modern-day princess, much like another global icon, Princess Diana. Both women, celebrated for their grace and seemingly impeccable lives, found themselves consumed by the very images they could not control. Their public identities became monstrous entities, devouring their private selves, leaving them to navigate a world that worshipped a fantasy rather than embracing the complex human being beneath. Yet this manufactured perfection often alienated her from her own roots. Growing up, even among her black friends, Whitney was sometimes called too pretty or too white due to her lighter complexion and her foray into mainstream pop. This sting of being perceived as other haunted her. She was a black woman who had mastered a universal sound, but for some, that mastery came at the expense of her cultural authenticity. She straddled two worlds, the raw, spiritual intensity of the gospel church and the comfortable suburban middle-class black America she inhabited. This duality created a profound sense of alienation, a feeling of not quite belonging anywhere fully. She was the pristine pop star to the world, but to herself, she was often a stranger in her own skin, yearning for a connection that felt truly authentic. The fairy tale shattered on July 18, 1992. On that day, America's princess married music's bad boy, Bobby Brown. To the public, it was an inexplicable union, a collision of two entirely different worlds. He was the volatile, edgy frontman of New Edition. She was the pristine, gospel-bred queen of pop. The media portrayed it as a catastrophic misstep, the moment the angel fell from grace. But for Whitney, it may have been an act of rebellion, a desperate lunge for something raw and real, away from the sterile perfection of her public life. With Bobby, she could be nippy from Newark, not Whitney Houston, the global brand. She could be imperfect. This marriage marked the definitive turning point in her public narrative. The whispers that had long followed her about drug use grew into shouts. Her behavior became more erratic, her appearances less polished. The couple's turbulent relationship became tabloid fodder, a public spectacle of arrests, arguments, and rumored infidelities. The most infamous moment came in a 2002 interview with Diane Sawyer. Looking gaunt and defiant, Whitney uttered the line that would haunt her forever. "Crack is whack." It was a desperate attempt to control the narrative, but it backfired, becoming a punchline that trivialized her very real and deepening addiction. The interview laid bare the tragic reality. The goddess was bleeding. The world watched, horrified and fascinated, as the carefully constructed image of Whitney Houston crumbled into dust. The pain that had once been channeled into heart-wrenching ballads was now on full, chaotic display. Did this tumultuous marriage mark her downfall? Or was it merely a symptom of a much deeper, pre-existing battle raging within? Before the chaotic storm that was Bobby Brown, there was Robin Crawford. Their bond was the bedrock of Whitney's early life, a love that dared not speak its name, hidden beneath layers of friendship and professional partnership. Robin was more than an assistant. She was Whitney's confidant, her protector, her anchor in the maelstrom of rising fame. Their relationship, which Whitney herself described as intimate and deeply connected, began when Whitney was just 17 and Robin 19. It was a profound emotional foundation, a safe harbor where Whitney could shed the weight of expectation and simply be nippy. Robin was the one who saw her fully without judgment, who knew the real woman behind the burgeoning icon. Their connection was a quiet, enduring rebellion against the increasingly strictures of Whitney's career and the conservative expectations of her family. "She was the first person I ever loved and the last I ever trusted," Robin Crawford would later write in her memoir, a poignant epitaph for a love story tragically cut short. The whispers about their relationship became louder as Whitney's star ascended. The pressure from her mother, Sissy, and Clive Davis to maintain a wholesome, marketable image was immense. In a world not yet ready to accept such a truth, their bond was deemed a threat to Whitney's career. Ultimately, the forces of public image and family expectation proved too powerful. Their relationship, once the quiet core of Whitney's emotional stability, was severed, leaving a gaping wound that would never truly heal. It was a silent tragedy, a love sacrificed on the altar of superstardom, leaving Whitney adrift in a sea of adulation without her truest compass. This quiet heartbreak became a silent blueprint for the chaos that would later consume her, a testament to the profound loss of the only stable, authentic love she seemed to have known. The descent into addiction was not a sudden plunge, but a gradual, insidious erosion, likely fueled by the relentless demands of her career and a deeper underlying depression. The Bodyguard tour, with its punishing schedule and constant travel, became a catalyst. The initial use of diet pills to maintain her desired physique, followed by sleeping pills to cope with jet lag and the inability to unwind after electrifying performances, opened the door. From there, the progression to cocaine was a tragic, almost inevitable slide. Backstage, the signs were often there, subtle at first, then increasingly undeniable. Stylists, makeup artists, and even some bodyguards were witnesses forced into a position of complicity or willful blindness. Some perhaps were genuinely unaware or too intimidated to intervene. Others may have been enablers, either by design or by simply looking the other way, prioritizing the show going on over the well-being of the star. The hushed whispers behind closed doors, the frantic phone calls, the desperate attempts to normalize increasingly erratic behavior. These were the unseen moments of a life spiraling. The story of Whitney Houston, in its tragic arc, echoes the familiar lament of other divinely gifted artists consumed by their own brilliance. Amy Winehouse, whose raw talent was overshadowed by her battle with addiction, and Judy Garland, a child star whose entire life became a struggle against the very machine that created her. All possessed voices that seemed to defy earthly limitations. All were exploited for their artistry, and all ultimately collapsed under the immense weight of expectation and the insidious grip of substance abuse. There was a chilling moment, perhaps in a quiet hotel room during one of her many tours, when Whitney might have found herself flipping through a magazine or watching a news report about the latest celebrity downfall. As she read the headlines, perhaps about Amy or another star teetering on the brink, she might have looked in the mirror, truly looked, and seen the ghostly reflection of her own future staring back. A cold dread, a profound sense of recognition, an understanding that the path they walked was terrifyingly similar to her own. The glittering facade of fame, once a shield, became a magnifying glass, exposing every flaw, every stumble, making it impossible to hide the silent war raging within. In the years that followed the public implosion, Whitney Houston became a ghost of her former self, retreating from the spotlight she had once commanded so effortlessly. The battle with addiction, once a private war, was now a public spectacle she could not escape. There were stints in rehab, periods of sobriety followed by devastating relapses. The voice, once a torrent of flawless power, was now a fragile whisper, ravaged by years of substance abuse. Yet within her, the spirit of the fighter remained. In 2009, she began a carefully orchestrated comeback, sitting down with Oprah Winfrey for a shockingly candid two-part interview. It was a confessional. She spoke of her love for Bobby Brown, her descent into darkness, and the suffocating grip of addiction. She admitted to the world that she had been lost. This was followed by the album I Look to You. The title itself was a prayer, a plea for redemption, and a declaration of resilience. The album was a commercial success, and for a fleeting moment, it seemed like the Queen was poised to reclaim her throne. But the comeback tour revealed the devastating toll the years had taken. On stage, she struggled to hit the soaring notes that had once seemed so effortless. Her voice was hoarse, unreliable. Concerts were marred by last-minute cancellations and disappointed fans who had come to witness a resurrection but instead saw a painful struggle. It was a heartbreaking spectacle. The woman who had given the world so much joy now seemed to be in agonizing pain right before its eyes. This wasn't just a physical battle to reclaim her voice. It was a profound spiritual war against the demons that had taken root in the lonely spaces fame had created. Can anyone ever truly escape the ghost of their own legend? Bobby Brown. Was he the villain or merely a tragic reflection? The public narrative cast him as the architect of Whitney's downfall, the bad boy who led America's sweetheart astray. And Bobby, in his interviews after Whitney's death, often walked a tightrope, expressing grief while also subtly deflecting blame. "I was the darkness," he might have implied in one interview, "but she was not innocent." This perspective reveals a complex dance of codependency, a shared descent where blame is a tangled web. Both were addicts, both were volatile, and in their turbulent union they found a distorted reflection of their own inner demons. It was a partnership of mutual destruction, a mirror held up to two individuals struggling to reconcile their public images with their private turmoil. The love they shared was often a chaotic entanglement of addiction, control, and codependency, making it impossible to discern who was leading whom down the path of self-destruction. Their life together was a series of escalating scandals and whispered traumas. The public saw the arrests, the tabloid headlines, but not the raw, brutal reality behind closed doors. The shattered furniture, the screaming matches echoing through hotel corridors, the desperate calls to hospitals for unknown ailments. And in the agonizing center of it all stood Bobby Christina, their only child, often a silent witness to the maelstrom. Imagine a scene. Bobby Christina, a small child standing outside a locked bathroom door, her tiny ears straining to make sense of the muffled screams and anguished sobs of her mother trapped within. The violence wasn't always physical. It was emotional, psychological, a constant barrage of chaos that tore at the fabric of their lives. These untold moments of domestic turmoil painted a far more devastating picture than any tabloid could capture, illustrating the profound suffering that festered behind the glittering facade of their celebrity. The final years of Whitney Houston's life were a tragic portrait of a legend in decline. The comeback that had begun with so much hope had faltered, leaving her in a precarious limbo. She was caught between the monumental legacy of her past and a present she could no longer control. Public appearances became increasingly erratic and concerning. Videos surfaced of her looking disoriented, her speech rambling, her once commanding presence replaced by a fragile, almost childlike vulnerability. She was still Whitney Houston, the name still synonymous with greatness, but the woman behind the name seemed to be fading. In the days leading up to her death in February 2012, she was in Los Angeles for the Grammy Awards, the very event that had celebrated her triumphs so many times before. She was staying at the Beverly Hilton preparing for Clive Davis's annual pre-Grammy party, but her behavior was alarming. Reports from onlookers described her as disheveled, exhibiting bizarre behavior and seeming agitated. She made a final impromptu public appearance 2 nights before her death, joining Kelly Price on stage at a party. She sang a brief, raspy rendition of Jesus Loves Me. Her voice was a shadow of its former glory, but the raw gospel heart was still there. It was a poignant, almost prophetic moment, a return to the spiritual roots from which she had sprung. It was the last song the world would ever hear her sing. The walk back to her hotel that night was the final journey of a queen who had lost her kingdom, a woman haunted by the echo of a voice that was once loud enough to shake the world. Were these final public appearances acts of defiance, or desperate cries for help from a woman who had forgotten how to live outside the spotlight? The machine, the entertainment industry, often appears as a benevolent force, nurturing talent and creating stars. But for Whitney Houston, it evolved into a monstrous entity that ultimately consumed her. Clive Davis, her mentor and the head of Arista Records, was undoubtedly instrumental in her meteoric rise. He saw her unparalleled talent and sculpted her into the global phenomenon she became. He was her savior, meticulously curating her image and sound for maximum appeal. But was he also in part an exploiter, prioritizing album sales and flawless public appearances over the fragile well-being of the woman behind the voice? As Whitney's struggles became undeniable, the question lingers. What responsibility did the record label and Clive Davis himself bear for her decline? Were there interventions, genuine attempts at help, or was the priority always to keep the cash cow producing regardless of the cost to her soul? The American media, hungry for scandal, transformed her personal struggles into a public spectacle. A heartbreaking montage of headlines flashes across the screen. Whitney, the fall of an angel. People magazine blared. Crack is whack, screamed TMZ and National Enquirer, turning her desperate denial into a cruel punchline. They reveled in her pain, documenting every stumble, every gaunt appearance, every erratic moment with a merciless voyeuristic glee. The contrast between the early headlines praising The Voice and the later ones condemning her as a crack addict was a brutal testament to the media's capacity to build idols up to celestial heights, only to tear them down with venomous ferocity. This relentless scrutiny and public shaming only intensified her isolation, pushing her deeper into the shadows, making her feel that there was no escape from the judgment of millions. The machine that had created her ultimately devoured her, leaving behind only the echo of a magnificent voice and the haunting question: could anyone truly survive its insatiable hunger? The official cause of Whitney Houston's death was listed as accidental drowning, with heart disease and cocaine use as contributing factors. It was a sterile, clinical explanation for a life that was anything but. The world mourned, but it also questioned. While the coroner's report closed the case, It opened a floodgate of speculation and enduring mysteries. There were no signs of foul play, yet many found it impossible to believe she was alone in her final hours. Who had supplied the drugs? Were there enablers who turned a blind eye to her suffering, more concerned with the brand than the woman? These questions linger, suggesting that while no single person was responsible, an entire ecosystem of fame, pressure, and dependency may have contributed to her demise. The tragedy was horrifically magnified just 3 years later. In an echo of unimaginable sorrow, her only daughter, Bobby Christina Brown, was found unconscious in a bathtub under hauntingly similar circumstances. She remained in a coma for 6 months before passing away, the victim of a fate that seemed cruelly inherited. This devastating parallel fueled further speculation. Was it a curse, a tragic coincidence, or the final, heartbreaking ripple of Whitney's own unresolved pain? Today, Whitney Houston's legacy is a complex tapestry of triumph and tragedy. Her voice remains the gold standard, an untouchable benchmark for vocal excellence that has inspired generations of artists, from Mariah Carey to Beyoncé. Her music is eternal, a soundtrack for love, heartbreak, and resilience. But her life story has also become a powerful cautionary tale, a stark warning about the price of fame, the crushing weight of perfection, and the isolation that can fester at the pinnacle of success. She was a testament to the divine power of a God-given gift, and a tragic symbol of how that same gift can become an unbearable burden. Was Whitney Houston's death a simple tragedy as reported, or was she the ultimate casualty of a fame machine that builds its idols up to celestial heights, only to abandon them when they inevitably begin to fall?